is Andrea Markell, and I am a park ranger at Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. This entire fjord we're traveling through, it's 65 miles long, and it was all covered under the Grand Pacific Glacier not that long ago, just 250 years ago. This area was under 4,000 feet of ice. So everything on the landscape and everything that has come since then is all affected by this really dramatic glacial retreat and this constant state of change.
Glacier Bay changes on a daily, in fact, on an hourly basis. It's never the same. The way that we see it today is not the way that folks will see it tomorrow. The way that future generations will see it is completely different than the way that we're seeing it now. So we can't expect to find the same thing when we come back to Glacier Bay. This is one of the first national parks that was set aside for the sake of preserving change.
When John Muir first came and started writing about it, he really encouraged people to, his phrase was, go and see for yourself. Even 100 years ago, we knew this was a very precious, very special place, and it remains that way because it has a very unique niche in our environment. You find a collection of animals and marine mammals and birds that you'll find almost nowhere else in North America, all living in a very harmonious situation.
So I first came as a visitor. I used to work as a park ranger in Skagway, so this is just a plane ride, and I had a long weekend. And I remember knowing that there would be glaciers here, but I didn't realize what a trip it would be. Every spot of the bay has something to look for, whether it's the plant life or the wildlife really impressed me. If you have time to explore more nooks and crannies or even go kayaking, getting off a larger ship into that quiet wilderness. So a glacier is a moving river of ice, and you do need a few key ingredients to have glaciers, and we have them in this park. We have very tall mountains and lots of snow. So the Fairweather Range has peaks that go up to 15,000 feet. So just amazing, tall, and very cold peaks you can imagine, and they're right next to the Gulf of Alaska. So all the warm, moist air off the Gulf and the jet stream blows into these peaks and drops as snow. And then it's so cold up there, you can imagine in the accumulation zone, that the snow falling doesn't completely melt off in the summertime. So then you get layering, and you get accumulation, and it compacts under the weight. And eventually it's so big and heavy up there that gravity pulls it downhill. So once it starts to move, you can call it a glacier. And our glaciers in Glacier Bay we're visiting are tidewater glaciers, which means they end in the ocean. And there's the chance to see this calving and their steep faces, and hopefully the chance to see a big chunk drop into the water.
People, of course, had been coming since John Muir's time, coming up on steamboats to come and see such things as the Grand Pacific Glacier and the Marjorie Glacier and Lamplugh Glacier, and they're all slightly different from each other. You honestly can't say if you've seen one glacier, you've seen them all.
So Marjorie Glacier, it's different every time you come here in that different pieces are broken off, the pinnacles look different. If it's a cloudy day, it looks more blue. On a sunny day, it kind of glitters. But as far as to see retreat on Marjorie, it kind of stops at the edge of the water there. Marjorie Glacier is in a state of equilibrium, so it's basically been holding its own in that position for quite a while. But what you can do is compare it to the glacier right next to it, which hardly looks like anything. And that glacier is just shriveling. So it loses 2 meters of thickness every year. So just in 4 years, 8 meters of thickness is quite a bit. I think it's the grandeur of it all. I mean, mountain peaks that start at sea level and go to 15,000 feet in just a few miles. It's tidewater glaciers that are twice the height of this cruise ship, dropping chunks of ice into the water with huge thunderous sounds behind it. It's the chance to see the wildlife. It's a very rich, complete ecosystem. You know, we don't spot it every day, but you know they're out there. You know we have brown bears, black bears, moose, a couple packs of wolves. It's a feeding grounds for humpback whales, sea otters, sea lions, even puffins. You know, it's incredibly rich. It's 250 feet high. It's like a 25-story building, and it's a mile wide and 21 miles long. But I think the fact that surprises the most people is how fast it's moving. You know, we're here to see calving and see some action, and that's because it's moving downhill at 7 feet every day. So that's just an amazing amount of ice coming into the water and activity for us to see and hear.
Calving is more than a visual experience. Of course, we've all seen photographs and watched videos of ice falling into the water, but when folks get here and they hear the ice falling into the water, they're often surprised. The sound sometimes reverberates for miles, and many folks are even a little bit startled when they first hear it. It makes an incredible impact. The native peoples here, the Tlingit peoples, who have lived here for many, many centuries, they had a term for calving. They called it white thunder. And the ice comes off on a regular basis, falls right into the sea, and it always makes that incredibly loud crashing sound. Marjorie Glacier is moving at a rate of 7 feet a day. That means that the ice within the glacier itself is advancing at that speed. That, of course, is an average over time, and it varies depending on what part of the glacier we're talking about or how the slope is in different sections. A lot of people get confused because they think that when we say a glacier is moving, that it's actually changing position. Glaciers actually work like conveyor belts, so the ice within is being pushed down from the mountainside at 7 feet a day. That's the rate. And when it meets the ocean, it calves. The glacier itself is relatively stable, so the face of the glacier isn't going anywhere. It's just different ice that's constantly being pushed down into the bay day after day. I fell in love with Glacier Bay because, to me, this place is more than just geology or science or history or culture. All of those things are in and of themselves important to understanding this place, but there's also a very powerful lesson to be learned here, a lesson of change, renewal, discovery, and hope. And we come to places like this looking for those things. It's the real reason that most of us are on vacation. It's the reason that I'm working here. There are, of course, folks who come here with particular interests, but all of us come away from here feeling something much greater, much more powerful than what we might ever have expected arriving here. The Lamplugh Glacier is often overlooked because we often see it after we've been to the Marjorie Glacier. It's not as large or as long as the Marjorie Glacier. It's only about 14 miles long and maybe 3/4 of a mile wide, which makes its dimensions about 2/3 that of Marjorie. It also doesn't calve quite as frequently because it's coming down at a slower rate, pushing ice through at about 1 to 3 feet a day. But what it does have is a very intense blue color, and that color appears at different times of the day. This glacier is overshadowed by a large peak called Mount Cooper, which sits over a mile above sea level, yet its summit is only a mile away from the sea, so it's an incredible relief. And because of its location, the blue often comes across as very, very intense. So we call this Lamplugh the Blue. And of course, it's set in a spectacular place, and that's one of the main reasons that we come to visit it.
This ice is so thick and so compacted, it quite literally has had all of the air pushed out of it as layer after layer of snow accumulates and it compresses. And because of this, the light from the visible spectrum that we have as it enters into the glacier, what gets reflected back to us is only the color blue. The red and the other waves are absorbed in that, which is why we perceive it as a blue color, but it's not blue.
Glacier Bay is, on people's lists of places they want to visit. And, it's recognized as a national park in our country, of course, but it's also a World Heritage Site, and it's an international biosphere reserve. So people all over the world recognize its importance. And it was set aside originally for scientific importance as a place to study and get a view of what happens when glaciers retreat. This was kind of our perfect opportunity to see that happen. It's really hard to answer a question, why is Glacier Bay special? It does depend who you're asking. For some, it's special because it's this place to view dramatic glacial retreat, glacial movements, tidewater glaciers, and how they can change this huge landscape. If you were to ask one of the natives from this area, the Huna Tlingit, they call this a homeland. And so when they view these mountains and glaciers or listen to them, they say they can hear their ancestors here. If you were to ask a scientist, this is an amazing place to do research, and that's in our enabling legislation when it was created as a park, was that it was a place to do research. It's a living laboratory, and that will be valuable as time goes on as well. And then it's just a place for discovery in this wilderness.
Your day in Glacier Bay is different from anyone else's, but It is that very unique combination of beauty, its history. It is planet Earth in action. And we see such a wide variety of things that are happening. You can watch for the birds, you can watch for the calving of the glaciers, you can just sit back and let the world go by and be reminded of what a truly beautiful experience planet Earth really is. That's my Glacier Bay experience.
John Muir, this American nature writer and conservationist from the late 1800s came to visit and just wrote with a really lyrical heart. So one thing he said up near a glacier like this was that standing here, one learns that the world, though made, is yet being made, that this is still the morning of creation.
Hello, my name is Ann Burgess, and I am the naturalist for the Coral Princess. Today we're going to be heading into Yakutat Bay. I think it's one of the most interesting areas along the southeastern coast of Alaska because this is where we find the largest number of tidewater glaciers in Alaska between here and Glacier Bay and College Fjord. In fact, as we've been sailing along the southeastern Alaska coast, you may have gotten a very good view of some of those glaciers in the distance. Alaska has something like 100,000 glaciers, and only about 10% of them actually have names to them. Today, as we go into Yakutat Bay, we'll be heading towards Hubbard Glacier, which is huge. This is a massive glacier, 6 miles wide, 350 feet tall, and 76 miles in length. This is one of the most studied glaciers in the world. Hubbard Glacier is the largest tidewater glacier in Alaska, and perhaps in all of the North and South American continents. Tidewater glaciers are unusual in that they are only found in a few places in the world. So this is a very special opportunity to see them. Every time we go in here, it's different. And that's what I like about it, because along the coast here in southeast Alaska, the weather changes so quickly from relatively warm to quite cold. So we'll get varying ice conditions, varying weather conditions. You just never know what you're going to get, and that just adds to the drama. Hubbard Glacier is also famous because it is perhaps the most active of all of the glaciers that we have in Alaska. We say that Alaska glaciers are either advancing or retreating. Well, you couldn't say that Hubbard Glacier was advancing because that sounds too sedate. Hubbard Glacier has been nicknamed the Galloping Glacier. It's been known to move up to 120 feet in just one day. And it does this periodically. It happened in 2002 and in 2004. So we just never know what we're going to get when we go to some place like Yakutat Bay and Hubbard Glacier. That's what makes it interesting. On a good day, we might get within 4 to 5 miles of the face of the glacier, and that's pretty good. But you'll understand why we seem to be so far back when you see all of the ice in the water in front of us. And the chunks may look small from deck 12 or deck 14, but they tend to be about the size of a small house as they're going by. So the captain has a very judicious approach to the ice because we don't want to scrape too much paint off of the ship. I hope you've enjoyed your time in Yakutat Bay. It truly is a very special place because it is all of the adjectives that are Alaska. You'll see that it's very, very different from Glacier Bay and Mendenhall Glacier in Juneau. They all have their own very distinct personalities, but Hubbard Glacier and Yakutat Bay, this is the biggest, this is the best, this is Alaska.